The heavy oak doors of the reception hall swung open, and a wave of sound, laughter, clinking glasses, a string quartet playing something aggressively cheerful, washed over me. Then, almost instantly, it receded, like the tide pulling back, before a tsunami. Silence. Thick, sudden, and aimed directly at the entrance. At me, and at the man standing beside me. Daniel. Elegant in a way that always felt effortless, quiet in a way that spoke volumes. His hand rested lightly on the small of my back, a gesture of simple companionship, nothing more. But in this room, filled with my family, my history, his presence was a statement. The invitation had been clear. Thick cream cardstock, embossed, gold lettering announcing the union of Madson Elizabeth Davies, my sister, the golden child, and Alexander Harrington III. And tucked away at the bottom, a polite but firm request. Regrettably, we are unable to accommodate additional guests. No plus ones. Explicit. But then came the phone call from my mother 3 days ago, her voice dripping with faux concern. "Harper, darling, just checking you received the invitation? We haven't heard back. And you are coming alone, aren't you? It's just, well, Madson wants everything perfect, you understand? No complications." The unspoken accusation hung heavy in the air. "Don't you dare make this difficult, Harper. Don't you dare be you. My name is Harper. I've spent most of my life being the difficult one. Not loud, not wild, just different. Different. Enough to be left out of the frame." This wedding wasn't just about my sister. It was about keeping me in the shadows. Again. That call solidified it. The comparison, always the comparison. Madson's perfection versus my complication. Madson got the perfect wedding. I got the passive-aggressive warning. Why can't you just be like your sister? The question echoed silently, as it always had. So, I made a different call. To Daniel. Not out of spite, not entirely. But because the invitation, the phone call, it wasn't about seating charts. It was about control. About ensuring I stayed in my designated box. The difficult sister, the one who didn't quite fit, the one best kept unaccompanied. Now, standing here, the silence stretched. Every eye in the room seemed fixed on us. I saw my mother near the front, her smile frozen, her hand clutching my father's arm. I saw Madson, radiant in white lace, her perfectly composed face faltering for just a second, a flicker of something. Shock? Annoyance? Before smoothing back into bridal serenity. I saw the groom, Alex, looking confused, glancing between Madson and us. They thought the silence was about them. It was about the space I finally decided to take. I didn't offer a defiant glare or a challenging smile. I simply met my mother's wide eyes across the room with a calm, neutral expression. Then I let my gaze drift over the assembled guests, the sea of familiar and unfamiliar faces, all watching. Waiting. Daniel, beside me, remained impassive, his quiet presence a steady anchor. He didn't need to perform. His being there was enough. Slowly, deliberately, I took a step forward, into the heart of the silence. The string quartet, after a moment's hesitation, struck up again, a little too loudly this time. The spell was broken, but the atmosphere had irrevocably shifted. Whispers erupted like small fires catching in dry grass. I hadn't said a word. I hadn't needed to. My presence, alongside Daniel's, had done the talking. The perfect wedding suddenly had a complication, me. The forced smile on my mother's face, in that reception hall, it transported me back. Years. Decades. Back to a sun-drenched kitchen, the smell of lemon polish thick in the air, the same scent she always used before guests arrived. I was maybe 8, struggling with a math worksheet, at the big oak table. Madson, 2 years older, sat opposite me, her own homework already finished, perfectly neat, her posture impeccable. Mom walked in, glanced at Madson's completed sheet, then at my messy one, eraser marks smudging the numbers. "Oh, Harper," she sighed, that familiar note of disappointment creeping into her voice. "Look at your sister. So organized, so focused. Why can't you try to be more like Madson? It's not that hard, dear. It wasn't the first time. It wouldn't be the last. Be like Madson. The family mantra. Madson was the benchmark, the standard I always fell short of. She was the neat one, the responsible one, the one who anticipated needs. I was the distracted one, the daydreamer, the one difficult to understand. My quietness wasn't seen as thoughtful, but as slow. My creativity wasn't valued but dismissed as impractical compared to Madson's straight-A predictability. It wasn't that I was invisible. It was that I was the wrong shape. Constantly being hammered, chipped away, pressured to fit the mold Madson occupied so effortlessly. Birthdays were less about shared celebrations and more about subtle lessons in my inadequacy. Christmas gifts always seemed slightly off. Madson would receive the coveted doll or the latest gadget. I'd get something sensible, practical, something that felt like an afterthought, or worse, something intended to fix my perceived flaws. A planner, a self-help book for teens titled Focus. The message was clear. Madson was to be celebrated. I was to be improved. Then came university. A chance to escape the constant comparisons, to breathe air that wasn't thick with expectation. And that's where I met Daniel. Not in a whirlwind. Romance, nothing dramatic. We were in the same literature seminar. He was quiet too, observant, with an intensity behind his eyes that mirrored something in my own. We talked about books, about ambitions, about the subtle hypocrisies we saw around us. There was a connection, an unspoken understanding. He saw me, not Madson's disappointing sister. It wasn't official, never labeled, just comfortable. Shared coffees, late-night study sessions, walks across campus where silence felt easy, not awkward. He listened. He didn't try to fix me or compare me. For the first time, I felt seen, properly seen. Then, one summer break, it fractured. I came home from my summer job one evening to find Madson lounging on the porch swing, looking smug. She casually mentioned she'd run into Daniel. Then, with a flick of her perfectly manicured hand, she dropped the bomb, disguised as gossip. He's actually quite charming when you get him talking. We've been seeing quite a bit of each other. Actually, don't tell Mom and Dad yet. She smiled, that bright, dismissive smile. Seeing each other. Secretly. The air left my lungs, Daniel, and Madson. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. His recent distance, her sudden interest in his existence. It wasn't just a betrayal, it was a confirmation of the family narrative. Of course, Daniel would prefer Madson. Everyone did. She was the prize. I was the runner-up, easily discarded. He hadn't chosen her over me. He'd simply followed the path of least resistance, the one everyone expected. The pain wasn't just heartbreak. It was the crushing weight of that old, familiar feeling, never being enough. Not even for the one person I thought truly saw me. The comparison hadn't stopped at the family doorstep. It had followed me, insidiously, into the one space I thought was mine. That betrayal simmered beneath the surface, a constant low heat beneath the everyday landscape of my 20s. It wasn't just the big moments. It was the relentless drip, drip, drip of small humiliations, the micro injustices that chipped away at my sense of self-worth. Like tiny paper cuts, insignificant alone, but bleeding collectively. Invitations, mysteriously, lost in the mail for casual family get-togethers I only heard about later. Phone calls where my mother would detail Madson's latest promotion, her perfect vacation, her thoughtful gift, before asking me, almost as an afterthought, "And what have you been up to, dear? Anything interesting?" The implication always clear. Probably not. Conversations interrupted mid-sentence at family dinners whenever Madson had something, anything to add. Ideas I'd tentatively shared in private, only to hear Madson present them as her own brilliant insights days later, met with nods of approval from our parents. "Madson always has such good ideas," Dad would boom, while I sat there, invisible ink drying on my tongue. It wasn't malice. It was worse. It was casual disregard. The constant, subtle reinforcement that my thoughts, my experiences, my very presence were secondary. Less important, less valid. And Mom? She was the master of minimization. Oh, Harper, don't be so sensitive. Madson didn't mean it like that. Or, you know how busy your sister is, she probably just forgot. Excuses that always painted Madson as innocently forgetful, and me as overly dramatic. Then came the wedding invitation. Thick, creamy cardstock, gold script, Madson and Alexander. And that little line at the bottom, regrettably, we are unable to accommodate additional guests. It felt less like a logistical necessity and more like a targeted strike. Madson knew I wasn't seriously dating anyone, but the explicit exclusion felt pointed. A reminder. Even at her wedding, my potential +1 was deemed an unnecessary complication. I might have let it go. Filed it away with the other small hurts. But then came the phone call from Mom 3 days before the RSVP deadline. Her voice, syrupy sweet, laced with that familiar passive aggression. Harper, darling, just checking you received the invitation. We haven't heard back. Madson is getting so stressed with the final details, poor thing. Pause. And you are coming alone, aren't you? It's just, well, it makes the seating chart so much simpler. And honestly, who would you even bring? Another pause, letting the implication hang. It's better this way, don't you think? Less fuss for everyone. Less fuss. The same word she used for merging my birthday with Madson's. The same logic used to justify countless small erasures over the years. It wasn't about the seating chart. It was about ensuring I arrived neatly packaged, alone, posing. No threat to Madson's perfect day, reinforcing my role as the uncomplicated, unattached sister. They didn't want me there. They wanted a version of me that fit their narrative. The quiet one, the single one, the one who wouldn't draw focus. The injustice of it, the sheer, unadulterated unfairness after years of being compared, diminished, and overlooked, finally ignited something cold and hard inside me. Fine. They wanted uncomplicated? They'd get something else entirely. Life has a funny way of throwing curveballs, doesn't it? Just when you think you've settled into a predictable rhythm, the past walks back in, wearing an expensive suit. It happened a few months before the wedding invitation even arrived. A Tuesday afternoon meeting with a potential new client, a major tech firm looking to revamp their internal communications. I walked into the sleek, minimalist conference room, portfolio in hand, ready to pitch. And there he was, sitting at the far end of the long glass table next to the CEO. Daniel. Older, yes, lines around his eyes that hadn't been there in university, but unmistakably him. The same quiet intensity, the same way of observing everything without seeming to move. He was introduced as Daniel Sterling, a senior partner at the consulting firm advising the client. My heart did a stupid little flip, then settled into a cold, steady beat. I extended my hand, kept my expression professionally neutral. Harper Davies, nice to meet you. Did he recognize me? Of course he did. A flicker, barely perceptible, crossed his face before his own professional mask slid into place. Ms. Davies, the air crackled, not with romance, with history. Unspoken history. The meeting progressed. I presented my ideas, fielded questions, kept my focus sharp. But I was aware of him. Aware of his gaze, steady and unreadable as I spoke. Aware of the subtle tension coiling in the room, at least for me. Did anyone else notice? Probably not. After the meeting, as people were gathering their things, he approached me near the coffee station. "Harper," he said, his voice low. "It's been a long time." Close up, I could see the faint lines etched around his eyes, the hint of silver at his temples. He looked successful, polished. Elegant enough to be innocent? No. Silent enough to be calculating? Maybe. "It has," I replied, keeping my tone light, non-committal. I didn't offer explanations, didn't ask about Madson. Why would I? That chapter was closed, wasn't it? "You look well," he offered, a standard pleasantry, yet his eyes held something else. A hint of regret? Or was I projecting? Your presentation was excellent, very insightful. Thank you, Daniel. I met his gaze directly. No shrinking, no looking away. Let him see I wasn't. The same uncertain girl he knew from university, the one easily overshadowed. We had a few more interactions over the following weeks as the project moved forward. Always professional, always polite. But there was an undercurrent, a shared knowledge of the past, of Madson, of the unspoken betrayal. He never apologized outright, but sometimes, in a fleeting glance or a brief pause before speaking, I sensed that hint of remorse again. Or perhaps just the discomfort of unresolved history. Then came the wedding invitation, followed by my mother's manipulative phone call. The injustice of it burned. Who would you even bring? Her words echoed. The assumption that I had no one, that I was no one significant enough to warrant a +1. And suddenly, an idea sparked. Cold, clear, and audacious. Daniel. Not as a date, not as a rekindled flame, but as a presence, a symbol, a walking, breathing testament to the past. Madson and my family tried so hard to bury, the past they assumed I had quietly accepted. They drew the boundary. I decided who would cross it with me. It felt like a risk. What if he said no? What if he thought I was being manipulative? But looking back at his quiet intensity, his subtle hints of regret, the way he saw things, I had a feeling. He understood power dynamics, he understood silence. He might even understand the need for a quiet, perfectly timed statement. I found his number easily through work channels, sent a brief, carefully worded text. Daniel, unexpected question. My sister Madson is getting married soon. The invitation was specific, but I find myself needing a companion for the event. Any interest in attending as my guest? No strings, purely symbolic. Harper. I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering over the send button. Took a breath, pressed send. The message delivered instantly. Then I put the phone down, walked away. Whatever his answer, the choice, the action, felt like mine. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't just reacting. I was setting the pieces on the board myself. Daniel's reply came less than an hour later. A single word. Intriguing, yes. No questions asked. No hesitation. Just acceptance. He knew. I didn't have to ask. And that's why it worked. And so, we arrived. Together. Stepping through those heavy oak doors into the sudden, shocked silence of Madson's perfect wedding reception. The string quartet faltered mid-note. Conversations died on people's lips. Heads turned, a ripple effect spreading through the elegantly dressed crowd. I felt Daniel's hand, firm and steady, on the small of my back. A simple point of contact, yet it felt like an anchor in the sudden storm of attention. We paused just inside the doorway, letting the silence stretch, letting them look. Letting them register the image. Harper Davies, the difficult sister, the expected solo attendee standing beside Daniel Sterling, the man Madson once secretly dated and discarded, the man whose presence here was a quiet bomb detonating in the middle of their carefully constructed facade. I saw Madson first. Standing near the towering wedding cake, laughing with a bridesmaid, her laughter froze on her lips. Her eyes widened, just for a fraction of a second, the color draining slightly from her perfectly made-up face. She looked brittle, like a porcelain doll suddenly realizing it could crack. Then my mother. Her hand flew to her pearls, her smile plastered on but her eyes wide with something close to panic. My father beside her, his face unreadable, but his jaw tight. The groom, Alex, handsome and oblivious until that moment, followed Madson's gaze, a frown creasing his forehead as he looked from her to us, sensing the sudden, inexplicable shift in the room's energy. Whispers started, low and urgent. Is that Daniel Sterling? What is he doing here? She brought him? The questions hung in the air, unanswered. Daniel remained impassive beside me. elegant, composed, meeting the curious stares without flinching, without apology. He wasn't hiding. He wasn't provoking. He was simply present. His stillness amplified the impact. He didn't need to say a word. His presence beside me, willingly, was the ultimate disruption to Madson's narrative. They expected me to arrive small. Instead, I arrived with history. Their hidden history, brought out into the light, not by accusations, but by quiet proximity. Didn't smile triumphantly. I didn't glare. I simply allowed my gaze to sweep across the room, meeting the eyes of aunts, uncles, cousins, family friends. The same people who had witnessed years of subtle comparisons, years of me being told to be more like Madson. I held their gazes for a moment, my expression calm, perhaps even a little serene. Then I turned slightly towards Daniel, a silent acknowledgement, before taking another step forward, moving further into the room as if nothing were amiss. The music stuttered back to life, a little too fast, a little too loud. Conversations resumed, but the undercurrent had changed. The perfect facade had cracked. I hadn't raised my voice, hadn't made a scene. I had simply shown up, refusing to be the edited version they expected. And in doing so, the entire dynamic of the carefully orchestrated event shifted irrevocably. Dinner was served. Course after course arrived, meticulously plated, tasting of expensive ingredients and underlying tension. We were seated at separate tables, Daniel and I in our quiet corner, the rest of the family at their large round table dominating the center of the room. Yet, an invisible thread connected us, taut with unspoken questions and sideways glances. From across the room, I could feel the weight of their observation. My mother kept shooting brief, anxious looks in our direction, her smile fixed but brittle. My father attempted jovial conversation, but his gaze occasionally drifted towards Daniel, a flicker of something unreadable. Calculation? Disapproval? In his eyes. Madson tried. She laughed at Alex's jokes, complimented the floral arrangements, played the part of the radiant bride. But her shoulders were tight, her grip on her champagne flute white-knuckled. Every so often, her eyes would dart towards Daniel, then quickly away, as if touching a hot stove. The silence wasn't empty. It was full of their discomfort. My quiet meal, my separate table, Daniel's calm presence beside me. It was a mirror, reflecting the cracks in their perfect picture. The whispers continued, discreet but persistent. I caught snippets. My great-aunt Carol leaning towards my cousin, her voice a stage whisper. "Did you see? She came with him. After all this time. The nerve." My mother overheard. I saw her stiffen, then force another bright smile, turning to engage Aunt Carol in overly enthusiastic conversation about the canapes. Deflect, distract, pretend nothing was wrong. The family motto. Madson, meanwhile, seemed to be shrinking under the pressure. Her laughter became a little too high-pitched, her movements jerky. She dropped her fork once, the clatter loud in a momentary lull. Alex, the oblivious groom, looked concerned. "Everything okay, honey?" Madson waved a dismissive hand, avoiding his eyes, avoiding my eyes. Fine, just clumsy." I kept eating, slowly, methodically, enjoying the sea bass. When the waiter came to refill my water glass, I offered him a small, genuine smile. "Thank I." "You! It's delicious." He smiled back, oblivious to the drama swirling around my quiet table. We didn't stay until the end. There was no dramatic exit, no final confrontation. After the cake was cut, Madson feeding Alex a bite with a slightly trembling hand, her eyes avoiding mine, and the obligatory dances were danced, I simply collected my wrap from the back of my chair. Daniel stood up as I did, a silent question in his eyes. I gave a small nod. Time to go. We walked out together, past the tables where the party was still in full swing, past my parents who were locked in conversation with some distant relatives, past the dance floor where Madson and Alex were performing their rehearsed smiles. No one tried to stop us. Perhaps they were relieved. Perhaps they didn't even notice. Outside, the night air was cool. The valet brought Daniel's car around, sleek and dark under the portico lights. He opened the passenger door for me, a simple courtesy that felt strangely significant after years of fending for myself. The drive back towards the city was mostly quiet. The tension from the reception slowly dissipated, replaced by the low hum of the engine and the rhythmic sweep of headlights on the highway. "Well," Daniel said eventually, his voice neutral, breaking the comfortable silence. "That was certainly an event." I turned to look at his profile in the dim dashboard light. Was that amusement in his tone? Respect? Impossible to say. Elegant enough to be innocent. Silent enough to be calculating. I offered a small, non-committal sound, almost a half smile. "It was a wedding," I replied simply. He glanced at me, then back at the road. "You handled yourself with remarkable composure, Harper." Composure. Was that what it was? Or just years of practice at swallowing words, at keeping the storm inside? I didn't answer, just watched the road unfold. He dropped me off at my apartment building. No lingering goodbyes, no promises of future contact, just a polite, "Good night, Harper," and a brief, unreadable look before he drove away. Upstairs, in the quiet solitude of my own space, I kicked off my heels. The relief was immediate. I didn't feel triumphant, didn't feel vindicated exactly, just still, like the calm after a very distant storm. The next morning, my phone buzzed as I was making coffee. A text message from my father. Unusual. I opened it. 3 words. "You were noticed, not understood, not apologized to, not even acknowledged as right or wrong, just noticed." After a lifetime of being the background, the comparison point, the difficult one. Noticed. I stared at the words for a long moment. Then my thumb moved deliberately across the screen. Delete. The message vanished. I took a deep breath, the aroma of coffee filling the air. Poured myself a cup. Added milk. Stirred it slowly. Nothing had officially changed. Madson was still married. My mother would still find ways to compare us. My father would likely retreat back into his comfortable silence. But something had shifted. A boundary had been drawn, not with words, but with presence. A statement had been made, not with anger, but with quiet choice. I finished my coffee, rinsed the mug, and got ready for work. Another day, another project deadline. The world hadn't tilted on its axis. But as I walked out the door, heading towards the subway, I felt lighter. Seen. Not by them, perhaps. Not in the way I once craved, but seen by myself. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. For now. Ever felt like the other sibling, constantly compared and overlooked? Harper finally made them notice, silently. What part of her story resonated most with you? Share your thoughts and maybe even your own experiences in the comments below. Let's create a space where we all feel seen. And if you felt that spark of satisfaction, hit the like button and subscribe for more stories about finding your voice, even in silence. Observe. Don't react. Let their reactions be the story. That was the key. My power wasn't in confrontation. It was in my stillness. My refusal to be drawn into their emotional chaos. By simply existing, calmly, confidently, in the space I had chosen with the companion I had chosen, I was holding up that mirror, and they didn't like what they saw. Daniel beside me was a masterclass in understated presence. He ate his meal, made occasional quiet conversation with me about neutral topics, and met every curious glance with polite indifference. He wasn't performing defiance. He was simply occupying his space, unburdened by their expectations or history. His calm amplified mine. Together, our silence was louder than any argument could have been. It was the sound of their carefully constructed narrative unraveling, thread by quiet thread.